Julian Burnside QC is a human rights and refugee advocate, and he joins us now in the studio. Many thanks for your time this morning on this issue. What do you make of the manoeuvrings of the federal government here, Kevin Rudd, to try and reposition this policy?
Well, obviously the objective is to reduce the number of asylum seekers coming here by boat. That's purely for political reasons, and I suspect that Kevin Rudd's heart isn't really in it, although Bob Carr's is.
Yeah.
The irony is that all of this rhetoric about asylum seekers is a result of the politicians on both sides of the House simply misleading the Australian public about what the asylum seeker thing is all about. You know, using words like illegals to refer to people who are simply seeking protection, calling them queue jumpers, things like that, which are utterly false, are apt to inflame the public attitudes against people who come here asking for our protection. And bit by bit, what I think the public doesn't recognise is that bit by bit, the politicians on both sides have changed the character of this country. We're now a country that wants to make itself look so unpleasant that people would rather stay home and face persecution than come here and ask for our help. Now, I don't think that's the sort of country most Australians really want to live in. And overseas, of course, we're seen as a very tough lot.
You don't think, though, that that's the political climate that both are adopting, and it's because it's resonating with the Australian people? It seems to be that is what will turn the election.
Of course, it'll resonate with the people, as long as the people have been deceived by politicians who call boat people illegals and queue jumpers and paint them as if they are a threat to the community. Now, you know, everyone was hysterical about the quote-unquote invasion of boat people last 12 months. The number who arrived in Australia in the last 12 months was slightly fewer than the number who arrived each year from Indochina in the late 1970s. There was no fuss about it then because Whitlam and Fraser decided to make a bipartisan approach.
Let's look at this supposed deal struck with Indonesia aimed at stemming the flow of Iranian asylum seekers. What do you make of Bob Carr's argument that the majority, if not all of those asylum seekers from Iran are economic migrants?
He has simply no factual basis for saying that. So there's three possibilities. One is that he has secret access to material that no one else has because there's been no processing of asylum claims since the 13th of August last year. So maybe he's got secret access and he's prejudging their cases. The second possibility is that he's just making a wild guess without any facts at all. And the third is that what he's trying to do is to say all of the decision making in the past has been wrong. The independent decision makers have been getting it wrong because up to the 13th of August last year, roughly 90% of boat people were assessed as genuine refugees. Now, Bob Carr comes in as if he knows everything and says, well, in the last 12 months they've been you know, mostly economic migrants. Well, how the hell can he say that?
And one of the other options potentially is changing moving the goalposts in terms of the process of defining who's a refugee and who isn't. What would the impact of that be if that was to be part of Kevin Rudd's announcement?
It can't be done formally. I don't want to speculate about what Rudd's going to announce, but they can't change the definition of refugee because our definition of refugee comes directly, word for word, from the Refugees Convention.
Yeah.
If we change that definition, then we are effectively abandoning our convention obligations. What they might be planning to do is making it harder for the Refugee Review Tribunal to decide on full facts because apparently the country information section of the RRT is being shifted into foreign affairs where Carr will be leaning on people to say, call them all economic refugees. Now, let me make it very clear. It is absolutely outrageous for a Minister of the Crown to be leaning on independent decision makers or distorting the evidence that they can work on. That's really, really bad form.
Let's talk about the convention because there seems to be a lot of confusion and we've had both Malcolm Turnbull saying it's not possible to change it, Scott Morrison saying they're looking at it, everything's on the table, and I guess question marks with the way Kevin Rudd's presenting it. What is possible with regard to the convention?
Well, changing the convention would be very difficult because you'd have to get all of the other signatories to agree to the changes.
And that's what, 120 other nations?
Yeah, and it's just not going to happen. Certainly not going to happen before the next election in Australia. Of course, older documents tend to be a little bit old-fashioned in some respects, and maybe it can do with some
tidying up. It's from 1951.
Yeah. But if there's to be any change to the Refugees Convention, the one that is needed is to include within the definition of refugee people who can't return to their country because it's disappeared under the ocean waves. So-called climate refugees is legally meaningless, because people who flee their country because it is no longer livable, they're not refugees according to the convention test. But I don't think there's going to be too many countries pushing to expand the definition of refugees.
Yeah, and going back to the convention debate, Scott Morrison, the coalition spokesman, clearly said, put as an option, a coalition government pulling out holus bolus from the refugee convention.
It'd be a pretty bad look. You know, Australia has, by and large, got a good track record internationally for our adherence to international human rights conventions. For a country as rich as Australia to pull out of the Refugees Convention, especially since we get so few relative to many other countries in the world, would be seen very poorly internationally.
A quick question, because so many people say, well, everyone's saying it's the wrong thing. What is the right thing? What is the right solution?
You don't have long enough.
Sorry.
I think we should process them fairly, let them live in the community after a month's initial detention, but make them live in rural or regional towns whilst their processing continues. Allow them to work. Instead of spending literally billions of dollars locking them up, we would spend a much more modest amount on Centrelink benefits or the like for those who didn't get jobs, and all of that money would go into country towns because they'd have to pay rent, buy food, buy clothes, and there's plenty of country towns who wouldn't mind a few extra people living in them.
Far too logical. Thank you, Julian Prince. Thank you for coming in.